Some of the guys we hired off the college campus were great basketball players in college, played in the NBA, could have played in the NBA, but chose to work here and play basketball for the Allen Bradley basketball team. In those days, the NBA isn't what it is today, and the Allen Bradley team was recognized nationally.
Into the early 30s, they had a basketball team. In fact, I think Wally Sprangers probably started the first one here at Allen Bradley, and that could have been like into the 30s. From that point on, I think the reason that we gravitated into the National Industrial League into the 40s was because the competition wasn't around here, and that was probably true of like Goodyear and Phillips and some of these other large companies that had teams in the 30s. That their competition was so limited that you almost had to form a league in order to get like teams. And Allen Bradley, at that point here, we won everything. And I'm not sure about the exact date, but I'm thinking I'm into the early 30s at least. Prior to that, I don't think they had much of organized local leagues, but at that time they had like the Lansdorf League in baseball, and they had municipal leagues in basketball, and Allen Bradley just polished everyone off. And so I think the next logical step was, pick on someone your own size, and so then they went in as charter members of the National Industrial Basketball League. When I got out of school at Marquette, if you can picture 1953, there was very little in the way of after college basketball to play. The NBA at that time was just a minor league. There were no big advertising contracts, and there was pretty much an Eastern league. The most westerly team was, Milwaukee, really. And so all of the, let's say west of the Mississippi, those players that got out of college didn't play in the NBA. The league then that was the second best league to the NBA was the National Industrial Basketball League. And I thought, matter of fact, I got a contract for the Milwaukee Hawks for $5,500. And I knew, that wasn't going to buy lunch for too long. So I thought, well, all right, if I go to Allen Bradley, which was a charter member of that National Industrial Basketball League, I'll probably get paid something like that, and I'll be able to play basketball. The basketball program in the Industrial League was much more prominent than you might suspect. At that time, they would get top coverage, and there was an occasion when we went out there, and certainly we probably weren't the biggest draw in the league, but we got front page coverage with huge pictures in the Los Angeles Times. And I'm not a big favorite of the Los Angeles Times, but that seemed to be indicative of the type of thought that went into this league. It was a substantial league. Now the NBA at that time would not have gotten that kind of coverage. The company would go out and seek engineers. They would get the top guys from Illinois or Texas A&M or whatever it is, and then Wally would go out and get the basketball players. And so it was kind of like a two-pronged recruiting thing there. And then we both got thrown into the same training program, and we would travel around the company, spend a week in a punch press department, and then we'd spend, assembly floor, and then we'd go here and there and test floor and so forth. And so the program was fairly elaborate. One thing that I always marveled at was the fact that we have a gym up here that's, you could almost stretch your arms across and touch both walls. It was small, and yet they would squash in, 800-900 people into their place. And I was always amazed because at that time there would be, no matter who we played, there would be, 6 or 7 players on the floor that would be 6'8" or more, 7 foot. And, to put all of those players together in such a confined area meant for very lively games. When other teams would come into our gym, their first reaction would be to laugh. One of the rules I remember we practiced, and you know, at first we had to mark the floor off up here, and that was the extension of the lane from the end line up to the free throw line. Previously it was straight. Well, they pushed it out this way and made a little circle out of it, and so you'd have three people, you know, in those positions, standing at a rounded angle to the basket, as opposed to before it was straight. And so, as you can imagine, when the ball would go up on the board, you get all of these guys crunching together at one time. And you know, I think like the pros don't use it anymore, and I think the Olympics have altered it. They've used some variation of it, but not that, because that was just brutal. I mean, if you were in there, and of course the object was to beat the other guy in there. And so you'd run as hard as you can to get in there, and if someone got in the way, you'd punch him. After the games, we would religiously go into the bar there, and right next door, the call it the recreation room or whatever. We'd go in there, and there would be a big spread of all Usinger sausages there, and all of the big special beer, and both teams would sit there with all of the friends, my folks, and we'd sit there and have a little lunch. And so it was a good arrangement. I think we did a lot of good that way with these companies. I think they came away with a very good impression of Milwaukee and Allen Bradley. Our schedules were such that we would go out to the West Coast, let's say, for 2 weeks, and we would play in Santa Maria, and then we'd play in Los Angeles, and we'd play in New Mexico, we'd play in Houston, Denver, and so forth. And so we would play like 5 or 6 games, and I suppose that was less expensive than to go out and play a game and then come back. And so we would have some long trips. The home games, and I'm not sure exactly when this started or when it ended, were televised on Channel 12, and that gave us exposure to the local market here. Before the game started, there was a little blurb on what Allen Bradley makes, and basically it's an industrial product, and I'm not sure how appropriate it was, but they did have a little commercial at the beginning of it, and they televised our games for I think about 5 years or something. All of us were amateurs, and at that time, you had to be an amateur to play in the Olympics. You could not even be a pro in another sport, because they call that contamination. If I was a pro in tennis, I could not play basketball in the Olympics. And these things have softened quite a bit over the years, but at that time, you had to be an amateur. Okay, so where was the Olympic teams were strictly amateur in those days? Where would you get players of that caliber except through college, or in this case, a step above college, and that would be the National Industrial Basketball League. And so what they did is they would have a tournament out in Denver. AAU would hold a tournament out there, and of course we always went. And one year we lost in the semifinals, and had we won, the last 2 teams generally formed the Olympic team. And so some of us would have been on the Olympics. I think that was in 1958 or so. We, at one time, I think when I left the company, I don't know if there were too many left, but at one time we were all over the place. I mean, we were in, as I say, the credit department, communications department, sales department. There were a lot of managers out on the assembly floor that were basketball players. I can, talk to someone that I haven't seen for 30, 40 years, and you still develop that, you harken back to the days when you were playing, you had good relationships, and they just keep going.